Hello and welcome to my channel. If you've been here before, welcome back. My name is Alfonso Peluso, and I'm an associate teaching professor in the College of Architecture at IIT, the home of the legendary Mies van der Rohe, and I'm adjunct faculty at Columbia College in Chicago in the Interior Architecture program. Shout out to all my students. I hope you're having a great day. Today is a special video. I've been meaning or wanting to do this for a long time. This is a Photoshop workflow video. So here you see what we'll have at the very end, and you see all my layers on the right. So my red layers are layers that I want to be off, and then my green layers are landscape layers. So if I just kind of turn everything off just so we can see, you see a bunch of different colors here. So we can code layers by color. So just kind of going down the list here. So we have the foreground trees, which are transparent. We have some people blur, motion blurred people. Then we have the people in the front. And then we have the trees in the back. And we have a grass fix layer, which goes up onto the patio. And then we have foreground grass. And we have just the building with a new rendering, and we have the old rendering here, so you can see the old and the new. And then we have the people blurring in the back and the people in the back, and we have a new sky. We have a couple new skies, so we can see those. And then we have the original rendering that just sits in the very back. So what this is about deconstructing your rendering from the rendering software that you're using. We're all using real-time rendering softwares these days, Lumion, Enscape, Twinmotion, D5. We're using all these real-time rendering engines. But for still images, if you really want your renderings to shine, you have to beautify them in Photoshop, and you have to spend some time doing that. You can see all these layers, and you want them to be organized, and the colors help out here: blue for the sky, yellow for the people, orange for the building, green for the entourage, the plants and the grass. All right, so that's what we're going to be doing in this video. Before we jump into it, if you haven't subscribed to my YouTube channel, what are you waiting for? Search me up on YouTube, click on the subscribe button, click on the down arrow to receive all the notifications. Yeah, well, what am I doing on YouTube? Well, I'm trying to get to 15,000 subscribers, and that could happen pretty soon if you help me out with that. All right, what do we have here? We have um, 202 videos. So if you are into digital design, if you're an architect, interior architect, a student of any of those, there is something here for you. Also, connect with me on Instagram at my first name, Alfonso, _ my last name, Peluso, looking to get to 3,000 followers on Instagram. See what I'm up to with my AI images. See what my students are creating. And just connect with me at Instagram to see what's going on. All right, let's jump into this tutorial. So we have to start from scratch. So I'm going to close this Photoshop file down, and I'm going to save it, of course. And what I'm doing is I happen to be using Lumion, but you could use any rendering software. What I'm doing is I'm rendering out just the model, just the Rhino. Well, I'm calling it a Rhino model because it's from Rhino, but just the building, we should say. So I'm rendering out just the building. Then I'm rendering out just the people, rendering out just the people. Then I'm rendering out just the trees. And then I'm rendering out everything. And what I'm doing with these is if I go to the little render tool here in Lumion, what I'm doing with these is I'm rendering out channels. So I'm rendering out the image, but I'm rendering out, in some cases, an alpha channel, in some cases, a material ID channel. So Lumion's calling a map. Whatever software you're in, it might call them something different. So the alpha channel or the alpha map and the material ID. So what do these look like? All right, let's go over here where we have some of these saved. So here is, let's say, just the building. This is what just the building looks like. But the material ID looks like is it's all colored. For every different material has a different color. And this makes this really easy to select in Photoshop. So that's the material ID. This is an alpha channel that separates the foreground from the background. So we'll use those to make custom skies. All right, so let's just jump on into this. So in Photoshop, I'm going to start with the rendering of everything. Okay, so I'm going to start with the rendering of everything. That's going to be my starting point. And I'm going to unlock this background layer just by double clicking in between the word background and the lock here. And I'm going to call this everything rendering. And this was made yesterday, so I'm giving it yesterday's date, because one of the great things about this workflow is you can always update your rendering and keep all your changes you made to the people, trees, hue, saturation, brightness, contrast. All those changes will stay, and you can just update the new rendering. All right, so I'm going to give this a color. I'm going to give it an indigo color. All right, so that's my background. Now I'm going to start to deconstruct the image, and I'm going to start with creating a custom sky. So I'm going to set my image up to make that custom sky. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to open up the just building. And I'm just going to Control A to select all, Control C to copy, and then Shift Control V, which is paste in place. And this is going to be just building. And this is going to be 01, 25, 24. Okay, and I'm going to close this. I want to save this as a PSD file, this everything PNG. So I'm just going to go to File, Save, get that saved as a PSD file. Okay, so you see that turned to PSD. All right, so I'm going to open up the alpha channel for the just building. And this is going to allow me to separate the building from the sky. So I'm going to Control A. We're going to do a lot of this today. Control A, Control C. I'm going to close it just to keep me not confused. And Shift Control V to paste. All right, so here is my just building alpha. Okay, and I'm gonna select the sky. So I'm gonna do this with a color range. We're gonna use this through this whole tutorial. Color range has a fuzziness, and fuzziness, you see, will select more of a color. So you see that image in this window right here. You see it going from black to white. So I don't want fuzziness. I want no fuzziness, because I don't want it to select anything in this case but the white. I don't want it to select light gray, dark gray, or black. I just want the white. So that shows up here as my selection. I can click OK. And that's my background. And I'm going to go ahead and save this selection so that I can use it later. So I'm going to save selection, and I'm going to call this just building alpha. Okay, just building alpha. So that is saved. And what's nice about that, say I Control D to deselect, I can always go to Select, Load Selection, and choose the just building alpha. So that's there for me. Okay, so this layer we're going to turn off. All our off layers are going to be the color red. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this just building layer, and I'm going to separate the sky and the grass. I'm just going to start there. So I'm going to have sky, building, and grass all on separate layers. So I'm going to go over to this just building. I can use layer mask, and we'll use those a little later, or I can just cut it out. In some cases I cut it out, in some cases I use layer mask. Depends on how I'm feeling. So in this case, I'm going to cut this out. So I'm going to Control X so I can use it. So that's my sky that I cut out of there. And I'm going to turn off this everything so we can see this a little better. Now I'm going to paste, Shift Control V to paste in place. And that makes a new layer. And I'm going to call this original sky, because I might use it, I might not, when I'm blending my sky layers together. So I'm going to put this back underneath. So I have just the building with no sky, and then I have the original sky. Now I want to get the foreground, so just the grass area. So if I go back to my just building alpha, I can go to select color range, and I can select the black area this time, and I can go to select, save selection, and I'm going to save this one as just building foreground. So naming everything as you go, something that makes sense, is really important. Okay, so I'm going to turn off my just building alpha, and I'm going to take that foreground. So I am going to Control X to cut it out, and then Shift Control V to paste. And I now have my foreground layer. Okay, so the just building right now became really nothing. Because we have the sky and we have the foreground on separate layers. So we can see that happening. So I'm going to go ahead, and this layer is no longer needed. I'm going to just delete that layer. And so just so I'm going to name these a little bit better, just so you know, it's just a visual cue for later. So this was just building, and this is foreground, and this is yesterday's date. And I'm going to do that with the original sky. So I'm going to take this and copy the date out of here and paste it in here so I see the original sky. Okay, so this original sky, I'm going to turn that off. And and I'm going to also turn off well, I'll leave the just building foreground so I can see. But I'm going to make a new sky. So Shift Control N will make a new layer in Photoshop. And I'm going to call this new sky. And I'm going to call this new sky 1 because I'll have multiple skies. And I'm going to use my gradient tool. So over here is my gradient tool. And you see it's using foreground to background. I'm going to change my colors. So what I'm going to do, one thing that you can do is you can sample from the sky that came out of your rendering software. So I can click on this foreground, and I'm going to sample the top, and I'm going to click on the background, and I'm going to sample the bottom color. Because you might have a sky with a whole lot of clouds. Now, I'm not a big fan of clouds and renderings. I like gradients. So I'm going to make sure this changes to the gradient. So I went to the pull down here under basics, and I'm just going to click the first one, which is foreground, the background. Okay, so in the new versions of Photoshop, it is actually a interactive gradient that can be changed down the road. So you see it keeps the gradient tool. It makes a mask. I don't really need this for this tutorial. So two things that I need to do. One is I need to right click and rasterize the layer. And the other thing that gets rid of the interactive smart layer that was the gradient. And the other thing I can do is disable the layer mask, or actually delete the layer mask. Okay, so it's just a plain old layer. So you see that already. It's a more dramatic sky, which we want in our renderings. We want nice, dramatic, custom skies. All right, we'll come back later on. I want to make sure that we come back later on and actually even add to the sky. Make it even more dramatic and appealing. All right, so this is our building. We have the sky. We have the foreground. Let's look at the foreground for a second here. Okay, so what I want to take from this foreground that I didn't take is I didn't take just the grass in the front. Okay, I want just the grass in the front. So to do that, I'm going to need the material ID for the just building. So just building material ID, because this will allow me to just select the green area, which is in the foreground, that grass in the foreground. So I'm going to take this Control A, Control C, Shift Control V to paste it. Okay, so here we are. Let's put this up here. This is our just building material ID, mat ID. Okay, and I'm going to just go ahead and use my select color range, and I'm going to pick that area. Okay, so we have that area. I can shut off the alpha. I'm going to make it red. Okay, so where can I get this grass from? Well, I can get it from this one, this just building foreground. Instead of cutting it out, I'm just going to copy it out. So just Control C and then Control V will make a new layer with just that foreground grass. So now you can see that. So I'm going to call this foreground grass. Okay, so here's my just building. Okay, great. So now I want to add some grass that makes it look like long grass is growing above this blue patio plane. All right, so let's do that. Let's make a new layer. So Shift Control N, and I'm going to call this grass fix. And I'm going to put that on top of my foreground grass. I'm going to use a clone stamp tool. And if you see here, I'm using a couple different brushes. One is a dune grass and one is a grass. So to get those loaded, they're part of the legacy brushes. So you have to go to this little gear in the upper right and go down to legacy brushes. And you can load in the legacy brushes. So that'll bring those in. And then you'll have these grass ones here. Okay, so I'm going to start with the dune grass. And then the size of that right now is 112. So you can see on the screen how big that blade of grass is going to be. I'm going to make it just a little smaller. Okay, I'll go with that. And I'm going to use my clone stamp. So what that requires me to do is use the Alt key to take a sample. So I'll take a sample of this grass. And then if I just, you see now it's making the grass, and I'm kind of going up and down. It's pretty tall, this grass. I'm going to put a few of these in. I'm going to keep it pretty low in the back there. So I'm going to turn down the size of it. So I put some patches in. And then I'm going to change it to the other grass. And I'm going to put some of that in. Okay, so this is the grass. So put some of that in. Make that a little bit smaller. And then just fill it in. Now, one thing that's important here that I didn't get to mention is I'm using for sample current and below. So that's really important that it's current and below, because that's taking the grass layers that are below. And I'm just going to fill this in here. Get that looking a little better. You know, for some of this, you'd probably want to zoom in a little bit. So while we're talking about zooming in, so there's my grass fix. I can turn that on and off. That's its own layer. Okay, so while we're talking about zooming in, if I go to the zoom tool, by default in Photoshop, it's just clicking the left button and it zooms in and out. It's something called a scrubby zoom, which I do not like at all. I like my zoom, I can zoom by window. I really like that. And then Control 0 will get me all the way out. So I really like to zoom to areas like that. I just find that to be more helpful. So it's up to you on that one. All right, so we have our grass fix. Let's start making these colors. So these are green. Foreground grass is green. Okay, so we're going to bring in our people. Let's get my sky turned on here. I'm going to bring in our people. So I'm going to open up. First, I'm going to open up the people mat ID. I'm going to need that. So I'm going to go ahead and Control A, Control C. I'm going to get this toward the top here. So I'll Shift Control V at the top. This is going to be my people mat ID. That's going to be red. we will bring in the actual people. So there's a rendering with just the people. That's here. Control A, Control C, Shift Control V. Okay, those are the people. I'm going to make that yellow. That's going to sit below the material ID. Okay, so you see each person has its own color. So instead of selecting each color, I'm going to select the background and the foreground, and then I'll do the inverse, and that will give me all the people. So we have this little Lumion, this annoying Lumion watermark in the corner, so I can get rid of that. I can just go to my main menu and go to, I want to fill this. So main menu, edit, fill is here. I have to be on that layer, main menu, edit, fill. And I'm going to pick a color. I'm just going to use my picker and it shows up there. And then I'm just going to fill it with that color. Okay, Control D to deselect. All right, so let's do this. So I'm going to select color range. And I'm going to pick the foreground, rather the background. And I can use my Shift key and pick the foreground and click OK. Now it's selected this person here, part of that person. So I don't want that in there. So let's see this again. Let me just do a select color range. And I'm going to pick the background. And then there's that person. I'm going to just use, for this, I'm going to use a rectangle. And I'm going to use my Alt key to remove that selection. Okay, so for some reason she's colored black, which is the same as the background. So I'm just going to delete that. And then I'm going to use the color range again and select the foreground and delete that. So now I have just the people. All right, so this is looking pretty good. So now I can get just my people from this image. Okay, now this is something a graphic designer showed me a long time ago, and it's a great tool that I always use. So I want to select just the material ID, just this material ID. So I can do that by holding down my control key and clicking in this thumbnail. So control key and thumbnail, I can click on that. That gives me the people. So for those people here, I'm going to do a select inverse, which is Shift Control I. We'll use that a lot today. Shift Control I is the inverse. And then I'm just going to delete. So now I have just my people. And what I have to deal with is I have to deal with getting the people to be behind the building. So on this just building layer, let's just take a look at that for a second. So we have just building. Let's make our skies blue. Okay, so just building. Let's take a look at that. I actually want it to have just the building in it because I already have my grass foreground. So I want this to be literally just the building. So I can do that with the material IDs. I can select color range. I'll try to do this with the Shift key. So I'm going to pick the walls. Those show up really nicely here. I'm going to pick the roof. That didn't show up so nicely because I'm getting this around the edges, but we'll see. We'll keep going. I'm going to select the floor. Okay, so I'm going to select that. And then I'm going to Shift Control I, which is the inverse. And, well, I actually don't need to do that, so let me step back. So if I let me take out what I don't want here. And I'm not zooming in. Typically you would zoom in. So I'm just using the Alt key. I have the polygonal lasso tool, and I'm just getting rid of all this other stuff that it's selected. So I want just the building. So I have this little part right here. I'm using the Alt to get rid of that. Okay, so that's just the building. So the inverse, Shift Control I, I'm going to go to, and turn this off. I'm going to go to just building, which is this one, and I'm going to delete. And now I have just the building. So now I have a layer that can actually sit in front of the people, because if you notice, the people are showing up, even though they're supposed to be behind the building, they're showing up in front of the building. So this is just building foreground. I get to move this one up now, and that does wonders. That gets rid of those people. All right, let's focus on the people a little bit. So let's turn on all these layers. All right, so what I don't have, okay, so I'm missing some parts of the file, which is, not a big deal because we have these files. So I'm missing that patio layer. So I'm just building. This is actually just going to be just building, literally just building. It won't be just building foreground. So I need that patio. So I'm going to have to bring that patio in. So I'm going to go to File, Open, and I'm going to open up the Just Building. I'm going to Control A, Control C, Shift Control V. This is going to be the patio. Okay, so if I go to my Just Building Material ID, I can select that patio. Select Color Range. There it is. Shift Control I is the inverse because I'm going to delete that from this patio. I'm going to turn that off, make sure the patio layer is current, delete. Okay, so there's my patio, and my patio has to go underneath the grass, okay, to really make that work. So there's my patio. All right, and I can go in and fill in some of this other area. Just to mention that I spend hours in Photoshop, so just keep that in mind. Even though we have these real-time rendering engines, we're going to spend hours in Photoshop still. All right, so we're doing pretty good here. What's next? So next we have to separate our trees. So this patio layer, I'm just going to make this like the just building, like the building elements. I'll make the building elements, say, in this case, I'm going to make them seafoam. So that would be just building and patio. Okay, so we have those. And then if I turn my everything, that turns on in the back, okay? All right. Trees are up. Oh, but let's work on these people a little bit. Why did we separate them if we're not going to do anything to them, right? We separated the grass so we can do the grass fix. We separated the sky so we can put this custom sky in. We're separating the people. I'm going to use Control J as the shortcut to make a copy of that layer. I'm going to call this people blur. So my people are yellow. And I'm going to go to main menu, filter, render, filter blur, not filter render, filter blur. I'm going to choose motion blur. And I'm using an angle of 0. And then I can look at it in this window, but I can also look at it directly in Photoshop. So here's 0. Here's going to be like way off. So I don't want them moving too much. But so what am I doing here? With architectural renderings, there's always this debate on people. Do we want people? Do we want silhouette people? Do we want real looking people? I guess people get distracted by people and they don't see the architecture. So we're going to add a little blur to the people here. All right, so that's our blur on the people. All right, next is trees. All right. Where's my grass fix? Okay. Just looking at some of this stuff here. All right, let's open up the trees. All right, so there's our tree PNG. I'm going to open up the mat ID first. Control A, Control C. I'm going to paste that in kind of high. Shift Control V. This is going to be red. All right, so I'm going to select the color range. I'm going to select the background and the shift key, foreground. Okay. All right, and then shift control. No, we'll leave it like that. Okay, and so now we need just the trees. Let me save that selection in case I need to go back to it. We haven't looked at going back to these things, but selection, save selection. I'm going to call this one tree mat ID. Okay, I'm going to open up my trees. There they are. Control A, Control C, Shift Control V. I go to select, load selection. Grab my tree material ID. Okay, so that's just the trees. Or is that the inverse? Let's see. Let's click delete. All right, turn off the material ID. Gotta name this trees mat ID. Put this up in the up category there. Put the people mat ID in the up category. These are my trees. These are going to be green. Control D. So there we have our trees. They're going to go behind the just building here. And what I want to do is I want to separate my foreground trees from my background trees because I'm going to make the foreground trees transparent. So I'm going to select my foreground trees. So this is this one on the right hand side. So I'm just using the polygonal lasso. So I can take this and I can select using the space bar to pan over. I can select that tree and then I can select this tree over here. Again, I would zoom into this. Whoa. Okay, here we go. Control 0 to zoom out. Okay, so I'm gonna cut that. Shift Control V. These are my foreground trees. Make that green. Okay, so I'm gonna turn the opacity down on this. Now I get that nice transparent tree in the foreground. They frame the image, but they kind of take your eye away from it. All right, so what we're going to do now is we're going to jump back to looking at the sky. So if I go to the sky, I'm going to make another sky, just emphasizing the importance of the sky. The sky to me is one of the most important things in a rendering. It can be so dramatic and it just draws the viewer in. And we see typically so much sky in our rendering, so we have to make it special. So I'm going to make a new layer here. Shift Control N. I'm going to call this new sky 0. And I'm going to choose some different colors for the foreground background. So for the foreground, I'm going to choose a purple. And for the background, I'm going to choose a yellow. Get that to be a little more yellow. Okay, and I'm going to make a gradient. And at the top here, I have to go to this pull down and go to basics and then click on the foreground background. And I'm going to see what this looks like. I might just pull it straight down. Get that blue at the very bottom, or that yellow rather at the very bottom. Okay, and I'm going to rasterize this layer. And I'm going to right click and delete the layer mask. Okay, and I'm going to change the opacity. So I'm going to lower that opacity down a little bit. So now I'm getting a mix of blues and purples and yellows all together. So I'm really liking that. I'm really liking how dramatic that is. Okay. The other thing I want to add is I want to add something called a lens flare. Now I can add it depending on how I want to do this, and I can experiment with it. I can add it either to the New Sky 0 or the New Sky 1 layer, because New Sky 0 it has an opacity. I'm going to add it to New Sky 1. I'm going to go to main menu, filter, or actually main menu, filter, render, lens flare. And I don't like in the preview that it doesn't show me the building, so I don't know where it is, but you can see this here. I can make these lens flares, and there's some options below, and there's a brightness option. I'm going to try it right there. Yeah, right behind that tree. I like that. I like that on the New Sky 1 because it's a little dulled out. All right, so a few things we need to fix in here. And then there's some more things that I definitely want to show. So what we need to do now is we need to fix some of this bottom area, and we don't have the grass in the background anymore. So what we don't have, if I turn on the just building mat ID, there's this background, this kind of other orange material that we don't have in here. So let me open up the just building. Okay. And we're going to go ahead and copy that, Control A, Control C. I'm just going to copy it into this one. So I'm going to copy it there at the top, Shift Control V. Okay. All right, so there we see that. So I want just this orange layer. So select, excuse me, select color range, pick that orange. Shift Control I is the inverse of that. Go to this layer and delete. All right, so this is going to be my background. So I'm going to call this grass background. So grass background. Give this whatever color, seafoam. Okay, and that needs to go behind the trees at the very least, behind the people. There we go. How's that working back there? All right, so that's working pretty good. All right, so that's that. And if I want to fill in some of this area here, like you see there's some issues happening in here. If my grass fix isn't high enough in the chain, in the list, I should say. So that can be, let's see, if I move that up, any issues with that happening, moving it up there? Let's see in the whole image here. Well, it can't be above the people. Okay. All right, so where's my grass foreground at? Let's see where we're getting this to show up here. Okay, so what we're seeing through that is we're seeing the sky. That's what we're seeing. We're seeing that sky show up through there. So we know what that is. So I need something that's above the sky, which is fine. So I'm going to use my grass fix. I'm going to use the clone stamp. And I'm going to make this grass bigger. And I'm going to see about filling that in. Okay, yeah, so that's working pretty good there. So you just spend some time cleaning it up. Okay, and I'm just kind of quickly showing you what you'd spend a little more time than what I'm spending on. All right, this is going really well. So what are we going to look at next? The next thing we're going to look at is adjustment layers like hue saturation. Let's make sure we save this. You want to save as you're going. So for my, let's say for my building layer, okay, so let's go to my building layer, just building here. Let's say that I wanted to make that pop a little bit with some brightness contrast. I could do that. And what I like to do is I like to go to layer, new adjustment layer, brightness contrast. And I want that to sit just above my just building. Now, what will happen by default is it adjusts the whole image. Okay, and that's not what we want in this case. We want to be able to have these adjustment layers typically specifically for what's just below it. You could use it as an all brightness contrast. You see that that's giving it brightness contrast. It's giving it a little bit of a pop there. So you could do that. And the other thing you can do is you can click on this little button, which is just this adjustment affects all layers below. Clip to, let's get that to pop back up. Click to layer. So now it's only going to affect the layer just below it. So if you see this, now it's only affecting the layer just below it, which is the building. And I can do some brightness and contrast to that. It has a little too much color in it. So I can go to layer, new adjustment layer, and I can go to hue saturation. So you want to take advantage of these, and I'm going to make that just on the layer below, and I'm going to take the saturation of that down. So I can go to all the way to black and white, or I can go to really saturated. So I'm just going to take that down a little bit. So we can see the effects of these adjustment layers. All right, this is going really well. What's next? Well, next I want to kind of emphasize that this layer system we have, that we can bring in new renderings. So we have this just building right now that looks a certain way. Well, if that new building gets adjusted, the glass on changes, whatever happens to the building. So we're talking about doing some renderings early in the design process, but keeping the Photoshop image and just bringing in the new rendering when that new rendering of the building is updated. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the new rendering, which has today's, but just the building. So I'm going to open that up. So here's just the building. So you see the building has changed. It's become purple, and it's a little more reflective. So I want to bring in just that. So I'm going to go ahead and Control A, Control C. Go back to the everything. Where's my just buildings? Right here. So I'm going to Shift Control V and paste it right there. So that's coming in right there. The new building is. And I'm going to take a look at this. It's actually coming in pretty good in the right position, even with everything on it, because it's falling right above everything, right above the grass. So that came in wonderful. That's awesome. So that's my new rendering, and I'm going to just rename that just building. And I'll give it today's date because that was the rendering from today. And these are getting the fuchsia color, I think. No, not the fuchsia. These are getting the seafoam. And how about these adjustment layers? I'm going to make those fuchsia. All right, the last thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to do a crop because we don't want the Lumion. Well, not the last thing. I'm going to do one more thing before I crop. Dodge and burn. Awesome tools. Dodge and burn are awesome tools. Unfortunately, they don't happen on an adjustment layer, so you have to do those, each time you bring the rendering in. But let's just add a little bit of dodge and burn. So dodge tool is what's going to brighten it. So I have to be on a certain layer. So you have highlights. You have highlights, shadows, and midtone, and you typically have to do it to all three. So I'm going to start with the shadows. So this is the dodge. So this brightens it. And then I have a brush size up here. So this is going to brighten the area. Let's make sure I'm on just building. Let's go to my stack here. So you really, sometimes when you're doing it, you don't see it. But here you see that's brightening up a little bit. Okay. That's the dodge, is it brightens that up a little bit. I like using both dodge and burn. Burn darkens it. So I'm going to darken, like for instance, I'm going to darken here, this corner. And I'm going to do that for highlights. I'm going to do that for midtones. And I'll do that for the shadows. It's a pretty aggressive burn I'm doing here. And it just gives it a little bit of flavor, you know, a little bit of worn, weathered look. And just to see what that looks like over here in the history. So this is no dodge and burn. This is dodge and burn. So it adds a little flavor to it. So I definitely like using the dodge burn tool. It's a nice tool for like shadows. Like these people don't look like they're, you know, casting any shadow on the grass, which is problematic. And you could use a burn tool. Let's see, we're in the burn. I can demonstrate that. You can use the burn tool. So maybe that's on the foreground grass. Yeah, I can kind of burn where the people are and make a little shadow below them. So that's working out pretty good. You can spend forever in Photoshop and it can be really worth it. All right, so that's the dodge and burn. Last thing is crop this thing. Edit, main menu, or just go to the crop tool and we'll bring this up a little bit above the Lumion and it'll give it a more horizontal look to it, which is nice. So this image is looking pretty good. And the benefit is, let's take a look at all this. All right, so we have new building, old building, new building, foreground trees in the back, people blur, people by themselves, a grass fix. This is all nicely separated so that we can work on these. And I hope you saw with the material IDs that when you start to add more to the building, this is just a little pavilion, but when you start to add more glass and things like that, that it's really gonna be helpful to use those material IDs. All right, I think we covered everything. I hope you liked this video. I gave you my Photoshop workflow. My head's gonna pop up in the upper left. Some other videos are gonna pop up in the upper right and the lower right. Give me a like below and tell me why you like this video. All right, have a great day and I'll see you on the next one.